Yeah, my name is Ken Belotsky from Negev Capital. We are quite new fund in psychedelic space, so we launched operations in February this year. Right now we have more than $20 million under the management. We usually invest from 250K up to 2 million into one company. Our main focus, we actually invest only in the companies that develop novel drugs based on psychedelic compounds, nothing else. And most of our allocation of our funds goes to early stage companies that are either in drug discovery or preclinical stage or phase 1 of clinical trials. Despite the fact that we just a few months old, we have already invested in 12 companies. Right now on the screen we have only 8 of them. Today at the call we have Bright Months and Small Pharma. It's really a very interesting company that we would like to introduce today. We have 3 general partners in the fund. So my background is mostly in software startups and venture capital. Vadim is from private equity funds, and Stuart Seidman, our leader in science. Stuart, please introduce yourself and our friends who joined our discussion today.
Hi, thank you, Ken. Hi, I'm delighted to welcome you to this discussion. We're going to focus now with our friends on the mechanism of action and the way mechanism of action it affects the strategic decisions that are made in drug development. So, as Ken said, we at Negev invest in startups, and we think, as we do our due diligence, we think long and hard about, of course, the management team and the valuation and the like, but we always come up against mechanism of action. And you'll see, it's a big challenge in the space to wonder what exactly is the mechanism. How do these psychedelics work for mood disorders? I'm a practicing psychiatrist and an academic, and so as a clinician and as a scientist, I really care what works and why it works. And so I'm very excited about the science, and as the science moves towards letting us know what works. The problem is science moves very, very slowly. Science creeps along, whereas patient care and industry needs answers now. And so many of these drug development decisions have preceded the science. They've gone ahead of the science for necessity because we need to make decisions. So the way I'd like us to think about it, at least here, is that there's a continuum. And on the one side is high dose, let's say LSD or psilocybin or DMT. Very high dose, 6 or 8 hour mystical experience with psychotherapy before, during, and after. That's the high dose of this treatment. And again, as a practicing psychiatrist and someone who knows the literature pretty well, it is a game changer. I think we can all agree there is almost no doubt that something about this, what I just described as the high dose experience, is antidepressant. And again, it's to those of us who treat depressed patients, it's very unusual to have a treatment that you don't have to take every day. Again, perhaps with TMS, but it's a treatment where you experience it and then you're better. I mean, when it works, and it works quite frequently, you're better for at least 3 months, more like 6 months. So this is disruptive technology. This changes everything. On the other side of the spectrum is low-dose treatment, no psychotherapy, taking it every day, and presumably tweaking the 5-HT2A receptors in a softer way. And the question is, does that work? And then we have everything between those extremes. Again, the high dose, the low dose. And why do we care? Why is it so important? Well, this high-dose treatment is a big deal as far as bringing it into reality, right? If people need 6 or 8 hours mystical experience, it's quite a challenge to scale. Whereas, and I think we're going to hear from Carol, if we can get that experience down to a shorter experience, again, hitting a certain threshold, that would be far more user-friendly for the field, and that would probably be available to far more people. So again, so our focus, again, is mechanism of action and these extremes, and what dose of treatment is necessary to get the antidepressant experience. These companies have needed to make strategic decisions around this, and I'd like them to defend them. Now, unfortunately, we had a last-minute cancellation of Ed Sellers from Small Pharma, so I'll just say the small piece of him. Small Pharma is promoting or looking towards using microdose, low-dose psilocybin for social anxiety disorder. And I was hoping he could defend that scientifically. They have some evidence in mammals, but not much in humans. And again, these are decisions that needed to be made ahead of the science. So he's not here for us to challenge, but I think we have enough between Carol and Gideon to have a nice conversation. So the way I'd like to focus this conversation is with the specific question: what is necessary for the antidepressant effect? Again, using a psychedelic, what do we need to get an antidepressant effect? And the choices are receptor occupancy, right? Do we need 5-HT2A to be stimulated at a certain level? Conscious experience. Do we need a mystical experience, or can we do it under anesthesia? Psychotherapy. Do we need psychotherapy? And if so, how much? Do we need pre-event psychotherapy, during psychotherapy, and after psychotherapy? Or is it just about the receptors and we don't need the psychotherapy at all? Again, this speaks to some of the questions about how this works. We don't have to go there just yet, but we're thinking right frontal cortical circuits, and depressive conditions probably have to do with a dysregulation of circuits, and something about the psychedelic experience, or at least hitting those receptors, hits that system in a way that better regulates it, and depression lifts. And importantly, it doesn't just lift, it stays lifted for months and months. So with that, let's start with Carol from Small Pharma and focus first on an introduction of Small Pharma and yourself, and then speaking to these issues of mechanism.
Great, thank you, Stuart. And can I very respectfully correct you? So Small Pharma isn't working on microdose. And Ed doesn't work for Small Pharma. Just to correct that little bit.
I said diamond. I meant diamond, not Small Pharma. Sorry, no. Get myself in trouble there.
No worries at all. So I'm the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer of Small Pharma. I'll give a few sentences of introduction to the company, and then I'll move on to the questions, as Stuart said. So Small Pharma is a startup neuropharmaceutical company. It's based in London, and it's developing novel treatments for various mental health disorders. And the company's current focus is DMT-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of depressive disorders, but also potentially for the treatment of other internalizing disorders, and we can talk about those later. So Small Pharma have initiated their first formal regulated clinical trial. This is a phase 1, phase 2A proof of concept clinical trial. And it's evaluating the efficacy, the tolerability, safety, PK and PD of DMT plus therapy in, first of all, healthy volunteers, and then the proof of concept study will evaluate DMT in patients with major depressive disorder. And then we have a proprietary pipeline behind that. And then just really to cover me, so I've got a long history of drug discovery and drug development in both large pharma and also biotech in both the UK and the US, mostly in neuroscience. So I have a previous history and quite a long history in psychiatry, but I have to own up that I've only worked in the psychedelic medicine space for actually a year tomorrow. So I only joined Small Pharma a year ago. Really interesting area, very skeptical before I joined it, but actually I think it's really, really interesting, and I think it will deliver. So I'm going to jump to the questions, and actually I've written them down so I don't forget them. So the first one that Stuart mentioned was the importance of receptor occupancy in the therapeutic effects of psychedelics. And I guess given that I was trained as a receptor pharmacologist first, then a neuropharmacologist, and then a neuroscientist, I absolutely believe that receptor pharmacology is essential for these types of drugs to show any efficacy. So they have to bind to endogenous protein receptors and either stimulate them or antagonize them. And I think that's absolutely key. And as Stuart mentioned, 5-HT2A receptors have been more than implicated in the effects of psychedelics. And there's some actually really nice data out there correlating the receptor occupancy at 5-HT2A receptors, the PK of psilocybin, and then also the subjective psychedelic experience. And that correlation is pretty good. But actually, certainly with DMT and probably with psilocybin too, 5-HT2A is not the only receptor that's implicated. In fact, DMT binds to almost all 5-HT receptors and at a reasonably high level. So I think many 5-HT receptors may be implicated, but clearly 5-HT2A is important. And just to add, in terms of receptor occupancy that's required, I don't think we know that yet. So yes, receptor occupancy is absolutely critical, I think. The level of receptor occupancy, which will be different for agonists and antagonists, I'm not sure we know yet. And certainly for DMT, we don't. So that was my opinion of the first question. Then the second one is around conscious experience or conscious subjective psychedelic experience and how important that is for therapeutic effect. And, I actually think the jury's still out on this. And in fact, I would kind of split that up into two sub-questions. So the first question is, do I think that a subjective psychedelic experience is important for therapeutic benefit? And I think I would probably say yes to that, but is a conscious psychedelic experience important? And I think I still have to be convinced of that. And the reason that I think it's so important is twofold, really. So one, I think it would be really scientifically interesting to show whether a conscious or subconscious psychedelic experience is required. But I think apart from the scientific interest, I think we have to look at the patient. And again, Stuart mentioned this. So, if a patient doesn't want to or cannot go through a psychedelic experience, and actually the reason our company selected DMT is it's a very, very short psychedelic experience, intense, but short. So if a patient can't go through a psychedelic experience, then it probably prevents them being able to have what I think is going to be a revolutionary treatment for their depression or their anxiety. So I think, there are a number of reasons that it would be useful to answer that question. Now, if you find that a subconscious experience is sufficient, how you deal with that in the clinic or on the market is a bit tricky because, having to give somebody an anesthetic, even a short sedative, I think is clinically, it's not intractable, but it's not ideal. But for me, I think the jury's still out on that question. And then the third question is around the importance of psychotherapy. And I think for me, this is a little bit easier because actually I do think the psychotherapy is really important. And I think, you administer the psychedelics, but with this wraparound therapy. And again, there are a number of reasons that I think it's important. The setting component of DMT-assisted therapy basically helps, I guess, to put the patient in the right state of mind. And so it helps them to have a much more tolerable, I guess, a safer and a more effective journey as they're dosed with DMT. And that's the setting piece. But in terms of the therapy afterwards or the integration, I also think that that's incredibly important. And again, for a couple of different reasons. So I think it probably makes the abstract experience into something very meaningful. And then also, I think it helps to, and I know capitalize isn't the right word, but I think it helps to capitalize on the plasticity that is induced by the receptor occupancy and then the functional response to receptor occupancy. So it kind of makes the best of the plasticity in that it lays down new beneficial neuronal connections. So I think the therapy that you wrap around the drug administration is really, really important for a number of reasons. And again, in the clinical trials that we're running, the treatment is psychedelic assisted therapy. We're not looking to just give the psychedelic on its own. But I think we'll get a really good understanding if that wraparound therapy with the psychedelic is beneficial.